Hello again everyone, we are now in chapter 9 and chapter 9 is about blood. One of the most important systems in the human body is the circulatory system. It is important because our survival is dependent on the system's ability to deliver oxygen and nutrient and take CO2 and wastes. The system itself consists of the heart, which is pumping the blood vessels, and of course the blood itself. If we want to talk about the functions or the roles of the circulatory system, we would say it will pick up the nutrients and water from the digestive system. It exchanges gases with the respiratory system. It delivers oxygen and food, nutrients, salts, ions, all of these to all cells of the body. It carries back the CO2 to the respiratory system, so the CO2 would be eliminated out of the body. It carries water and metabolic wastes to the digestive system, so they can be eliminated through defecation. Also, it eliminates excessive amount of water, salts, metabolic waste as well to the urinary system, so they can be eliminated through urination. And in general, it will help in regulating the body temperature by distributing the temperature all across the human body. So these are different roles of the circulatory system. Now, blood as a component of the cardiovascular system is a specialized connective tissue. So blood is a connective tissue, and this is the only type of tissue that is a fluid in our body. It contains specialized cells and cell fragments. We are going to talk about them. Also, it contains watery solution of ions and molecules, and we will explore some of these solutions or some of these ions and molecules. In general, blood has three primary functions: transportation of nutrients, waste, hormones, regulation of body temperature, water volume, and pH, and it defends against infections and bleeding. So all of these are general functions of the blood. This is an animation video about the blood, so please watch it. Now, for the plasma or the component of the blood, again we have the plasma. The plasma is making around 55% of the entire blood. So if we took a blood in a tube and we spin it, we will end up with this distribution of component of the blood. The upper part would be the plasma. This would form around 55% in a healthy person, and we will see that most of this 55% is water. Within the plasma, as I said, we have water, we have ions, we have proteins, we have hormones, we have gases, we have nutrients and waste. All of them are dissolved within the plasma. Then there is the formed element, which are two types. We have the platelets and the white blood cells. These are forming around 1% of the blood. And then the rest are red blood cells, around 44% of the blood. This table shows the component of each part of the blood and with simplified functions of each one of these components. Now, for the plasma itself, it's a liquid portion of the blood. As I said, it's 90% of it is water, and then we have around 10% are dissolved solutes: proteins, hormones, ions, amino acids, carbohydrates, vitamins, and metabolic waste. All of these solutes are dissolved within the water portion of the plasma. Now, maybe the most important part of these solutes are the proteins. And for the proteins, we have several groups of proteins. Albumins, these are important because they would maintain something called osmotic balance with the interstitial fluid. So in this case, we have our body has the ability to maintain just enough amount of water, not to dehydrate it, and at the same time not to overhydrate. So that is the osmotic balance. Another set of proteins are called the globulins. These are very diverse group of proteins. For example, we have the beta globulin. There are important transport functions. Part of them, they will form the cholesterol, the HDL and the LDL, the bad cholesterol. We have gamma globulins. These are the antibodies. They will help in defending against infections. And of course, we have the clotting proteins, which are responsible for if you have a cut and you want your body is going to stop the bleeding by forming a clot. These proteins are the ones who are responsible for that. For the red blood cells, they serve the function of transporting oxygen and CO2. So this is very important functions of the red blood cells. They are packed with a protein called hemoglobin. This protein specifically is the protein responsible for transporting oxygen. Oxygen, we'll see some of that, is going to bind to hemoglobin, and that's why, or that's how hemoglobin or red blood cells are transporting oxygen. Hemoglobin itself includes something called hemigroups. These are responsible for the red color of the blood. And each one of these groups is going to have an iron atom that to which the oxygen is going to bind. So the oxygen is binding to the iron within the hemoglobin molecule. Now, another important thing about the red blood cells, they are originated from stem cells in the bone marrow. And their lifespan is around 120 days. So every 120 days, we literally have a new blood. And the hormone that controls their production is something called erythropoietin, and this is produced by the kidney. Oops. So the kidney, and we will see that, is responsible for controlling of the production of the red blood cells. These are microscopic images of the red blood cells. These are very tiny red blood cells. And this is the hemoglobin. So this is one general hemoglobin. This is the heme group. Within it, we have the iron. So the oxygen is going to bind here. Actually, it's just one oxygen, one oxygen, one oxygen, one oxygen. So each heme group or each hemoglobin is going to bind 4 oxygens. Usually, one red blood cell would have around 250 million of these hemoglobins. Now, the count of red blood cells in the blood matters, and matters a lot. And that is the hematocrit. That is the percentage of the whole blood that consists of red blood cells. In men, it is between 43 and 49%. In women, between 37 to 43%. And hemoglobin out of this should be in men around 14 to 18 gram percent, and for the women between 12 and 14 gram percent among these percentage. Now, low hematocrit or hemoglobin might indicate anemia, that is inability of the blood to carry oxygen. At the same time, high hematocrit might respond to high elevation, which is when we have less oxygen available in the atmosphere, the body will tend to produce more red blood cells or more hemoglobin to compensate for the low oxygen. So think of it making more carriers to catch more oxygen. Since there is less oxygen, we are trying to compensate the difference by carrying more oxygen. Now, very high hematocrit is risky because of increased blood viscosity. This means that the blood is very thick. Since we have more red blood cells, remember the red blood cells normal value should be around 44%. Now with high hematocrit, this might move to maybe 50%, 52%. This means that the blood is so thick and sometimes it cannot be pushed through the small vessels of the body. As we said, the blood cells are produced within the bone marrow from a single stem cell, and that single stem cell is responsible for giving us all of the blood cells, whether they are red blood cells or white blood cells. And this is something very unique in a human body. Now, for the red blood cells, as we said, they have very short lifespan, 120 days, since they don't have nucleus. So there is no ability to survive beyond 120 days. The aged red blood cells are removed by macrophages. These are large phagocytic cells, part of the white blood cells in the liver and spleen. Now, remember, to understand these 2 points, we said the red blood cells, they have the hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is made out of the heme pigment, which includes iron. So there is iron, and there are other proteins. Okay, so what happens in the liver and in the spleen, mainly in the spleen, that these two, the iron and the proteins, would be recycled, sent back to the blood, or stored in the liver or in liver for reuse. The heme itself, it's a pigment that we cannot recycle, so it will be sent to the digestive system. Over there are certain microorganisms. They are going to convert the heme to something called bilirubin, and that bilirubin would be sent out of the body through defecation, out of body with the feces, with defecation or through defecation. Okay, so this process shows how the hemoglobin is broken down within the liver, or even within the spleen, mainly within the spleen. So the heme part, which is the pigment, will be sent to the digestive system. Over there it will be turned to something called bilirubin, and that would be sent out of the body. And by the way, bilirubin is the one responsible for the color of the feces. And as I said, it is coming from the heme pigment. Whereas the iron and the proteins would be recycled into the blood or stored within the liver and within the spleen till they are going to be reused. Now, as we said, red blood cells production is regulated by hormone, and that hormone is erythropoietin, and that hormone is produced by the kidney. So this is the kidney. Now, the red blood cells, or the count number, the red blood cells count number is controlled by negative feedback. If you remember, what's this? Negative feedback. Okay, so this is part of a homeostatic mechanism. Special cells in the kidneys will monitor oxygen availability. When this oxygen availability decreases, these cells are going to produce the erythropoietin. Erythropoietin would go to the bone marrow and stimulate increased production of RBC cells, red blood cells. And these newly produced red blood cells would go directly to the blood and carry more oxygen. That would restore oxygen availability to normal, and then restore the oxygen availability to the set point. If there is more need of red blood cells, the whole process would repeat itself, until we restore the set point of oxygen availability. Now, as we said, this might reduce viscosity of blood, which means that the heart has to pump harder to push the blood through the vessels. But this is it. We still need oxygen. So a lot of red blood cells is not good. Less of red blood cells is not good. There is always this set point. Now, sometimes we have some problems within the kidneys, so they don't have enough erythropoietin secretions, and that would affect the hematocrit. So if there is no erythropoietin secretion due to a disease in the kidney, this might affect the red blood cells production. Some athletes also may abuse erythropoietin to increase their red blood cells production and make more oxygen available in their blood, so their muscles would work at a better conversion of energy. All of these are, again, as you can see, are related to this erythropoietin and the different roles it plays in red blood cells production. I will stop here. Then we will come back. We will talk about the white blood cells. Please post your comments, ideas, thoughts in the forum, and we will see you in the lab.